Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're taking on something huge, really fundamental.
Yeah, absolutely fundamental.
We're looking at the system beneath almost everything we do as humans. We're diving into human language itself.
That intricate, amazing system.
And this deep dive, it's really for you, the listener, because you use this system constantly, every single day.
Mm-hmm. Without even thinking about it most of the time.
Exactly. So the big questions are, what really is language? How's it structured? And maybe the biggest mystery, where did this uniquely human thing even come from?
It's a massive topic. And, language is arguably the defining thing about our species. Biologically, cognitively, it sets us apart.
Okay, so let's start with a working definition. At its core, language is, what, a structured communication system.
Right. It's got grammar, it's got vocabulary, and its whole purpose is conveying meaning.
And it's our main way of doing that, whether we speak it or sign it.
Primarily, yes. Though, body language plays a role too. But structured language is key.
Here's something that always blows my mind, though. Written language. It feels ancient, but it's actually super recent. Cuneiform, that's the first we know of.
Tiny blip in history, really.
Compared to spoken language, which must predate writing by, well, tens of thousands of years at the very least. Maybe much, much longer.
Exactly. We were talking, arguing, telling stories around campfires for an immense amount of time before anyone thought to scratch symbols onto clay or stone.
And that huge gap, that tells us something really important, right? About the nature of language itself.
It points directly to what linguists call modality independence. It's a crucial concept.
Meaning the language system isn't tied to the way it's delivered. It's separate from sound or sight or touch.
Precisely. The core system, the grammar, the rules, the words, exists independently of whether you hear it, see it as signs, read it as text, or feel it as braille.
So the spoken words, the hand shapes in sign language, the letters on a page, they're just different ways to encode the same underlying structure.
Exactly. They're the transmission channels. The language itself is the abstract system of rules and meanings. Written or signed forms are just encoding that natural human capacity for speech or structured gesture.
Wow, okay. And that distinction you're saying is really important when we start looking at how the brain handles language.
Absolutely vital.
Yeah.
Because it tells us our brains are wired to process the structure of language, not just, say, process sound waves. It's a deeper cognitive function.
Okay, so let's dig into the nature of the system, the debate over what language is. It's not new, is it? It goes way back.
Oh, centuries back. Millennia, actually. You can trace serious philosophical inquiry into language and meaning right back to ancient Greece, like 5th century BCE.
And the crazy thing is, the arguments they were having then are still relevant today.
Absolutely. You had figures like Gorgias, who was pretty skeptical. He basically argued that language couldn't really represent objective truth, maybe not even shared experience.
How so? What was his reasoning?
Well, he kind of argued in stages. Like, if something existed, we couldn't know it. If we knew it, we couldn't communicate it. And even if we could communicate it, the person listening wouldn't truly understand it in the same way. Language was inherently flawed for him.
That's deeply skeptical. Wow. So what was the counter-argument?
Well, you have Plato. And his view really sets the stage for a lot of later rationalist thinking.
Yeah.
He argued communication works precisely because language connects to something real, to independent ideas or concepts, these sort of perfect forms.
So for Plato, language wasn't the problem. It was the bridge to understanding reality.
Exactly. A tool to access objective truth, you could say.
And this debate carried on through the Enlightenment.
It did, yeah. But the focus shifted a bit more towards origins. Where did it come from? You had someone like Jean-Jacques Rousseau.
Right.
He had this idea that language didn't start with logic, but with emotion. Instinctive cries, passions. He thought early language was probably more like music, really. An emotional, almost primal outpouring.
Okay, so in emotional origin, what was the other side of that coin?
The rationalists, people like Kant, Descartes, they saw it completely differently. For them, language came from rational, logical thought. It was a tool for reason, maybe even necessary for complex reasoning to develop.
So reason first, then complex language.
That was their angle, yeah.
Yeah.
A cognitive device, fundamentally.
And then fast forward to the 20th century, things shifted again with the linguistic turn.
Big time. This is where you get figures like Wittgenstein. His argument was pretty radical. He said, look, a lot of the problems philosophers have wrestled with for ages about reality, knowledge, metaphysics, they aren't actually problems about the world. They're problems about language.
Whoa. So confusion about how we talk about things, not confusion about the things themselves.
Kind of, yeah. He argued that philosophy, at its heart, is the study of language, how it works, how it shapes our thought, where it breaks down. That puts language front and center.
That's a huge perspective shift.
Yeah.
And all that history, that philosophical wrestling, it set the stage for how modern linguistics tries to define language, right? Especially Saussure.
Ferdinand de Saussure, yeah. His distinctions are absolutely foundational. You can't really study linguistics without bumping into them. He gave us this key tripartite view.
Okay, break it down for us. What are the three parts?
First, there's language with a capital L, sort of. That's language as the general human capacity. The faculty itself, the universal ability we all seem to have.
Okay, the abstract potential for language.
Exactly. Then there's lang. That refers to a specific concrete linguistic system, like the rules and conventions of French or Japanese or Swahili. It's the shared social knowledge of a language.
The system itself, the grammar book, so to speak, that exists in the community's collective mind.
Right. And finally, there's parole. That's the actual messy, real-world use of language, the specific utterances people make. Speaking, writing, it's language in action.
So lang is the idealized system, and parole is how we actually use it, with all our ums and ahs and mistakes.
Precisely. And understanding these helps us see the three main ways modern linguistics tries to define language. It gives you, the learner, these different lenses.
Okay, what are those lenses?
Well, you can define language based on what it is fundamentally, how it's structured, or what it does.
Got it. So perspective one.
Perspective one, language as a mental faculty or organ. This view emphasizes the biology, the innate wiring. Thinkers like Noam Chomsky, Jerry Fodor, they argue that the basic architecture of language, what Chomsky called universal grammar, is built in.
So it's not something we learn purely from scratch, like history dates. It's more like learning to walk. It just unfolds.
That's the idea. It's an innate capacity that gets activated by exposure to language in the environment. It's not explicitly taught, especially the complex grammatical rules kids pick up so effortlessly.
And there's evidence for this, right? It's not just a theory.
Oh, absolutely. Some really powerful evidence comes from natural experiments. Take Creole languages. When people speaking different languages are forced together, they often develop a simplified contact language called a pidgin. Pidgins usually have very basic, inconsistent grammar. But the children who grow up hearing only that pidgin, they don't just learn the pidgin. They spontaneously create a fully complex, rule-governed language, a Creole within a single generation. Their brains seem to impose structure where there wasn't much before.
Wow. They complexify it automatically.
Yeah. And maybe even more striking is Nicaraguan Sign Language. In the 1970s and 80s, deaf children were brought together in schools for the first time. They had no shared sign language. They started with simple home signs. And within a very short time, the younger children collaboratively built a completely new, rich, complex sign language system from the ground up. No adult input for the grammar. It strongly suggests the brain is primed to create linguistic structure.
That's incredible. Okay, so that's the innate faculty view. What's perspective two?
Perspective two focuses on language as a formal symbolic system. This is more of a structuralist viewpoint. It looks at language, especially grammar, as a kind of self-contained system of rules, like math almost. Rules that connect symbols or signs to meanings.
This sounds more like Chomsky's other big contribution, generative grammar.
Exactly. Chomsky's generative theory fits right in here. He defined language competence as the ability to generate an infinite number of grammatical sentences using a finite set of rules, these transformational grammars. And crucially, he argued these rule systems themselves are innate. The focus is on the formal machinery.
Okay, so the internal rules, the engine that makes sentences.
Yeah.
But language changes, right? It adapts to how we use it. How does the formal system view account for that?
Ah, that's where the third perspective comes in handy. Defining language as a tool for communication. This is the functionalist approach.
Focusing on what language does for us.
Right. Functional theories, which you see a lot in sociolinguistics and pragmatics, view language structures, including grammar, as emerging from use. They argue that grammar is shaped and tailored, you might say, by the pressures of communication.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Why do most languages have ways to mark tense, like past, present, future? From a functional view, it's not just an arbitrary formal feature. It's because we need to talk about things that happened, are happening, or will happen. We need to coordinate actions, share memories, make plans. The grammar evolves to meet these communicative needs efficiently.
So the structure serves the function. It adapts over time through social use.
That's the core idea. The structures aren't just biologically given. They're also shaped by generations of speakers trying to understand each other effectively.
Okay, so we have the biological potential, the formal rule system, and the social tool. It sounds like you really need all three to get the full picture.
I think that's right. They're not mutually exclusive. A complete understanding probably needs to integrate the innate capacity, the abstract structure, and the way it's used and adapted in the real world.
Okay, that gives us a much richer idea of what language is. Now, the question that jumps out: what makes human language so special? How is it different from, say, bees dancing or birds singing or dogs barking?
Right. That's where Charles Hockett's design features come in really handy. He outlined a set of characteristics, and when you compare human language to animal communication systems against these features, the differences become pretty stark.
So what's the first big difference?
Probably the most powerful one is productivity, or open-endedness. Human language is infinitely creative.
Meaning we can say things nobody has ever said before.
Exactly. We can combine existing words and rules to create a limitless number of new, meaningful sentences. And, crucially, other speakers can understand them. Think about poetry, novels, scientific theories, complex arguments, all built from the same finite set of ingredients.
And animal communication doesn't have that.
Generally, no. Animal communication systems are typically closed. They have a fixed, finite number of signals, usually tied to very specific situations: danger, food, mating, territory. A monkey might have a specific call for leopard and another for eagle, but it can't combine them to say, look out, there's a leopard hiding near that eagle's nest from yesterday.
Right. No new combinations to express novel ideas.
Very limited, if any. That infinite generativity seems uniquely human.
And what makes that productivity possible? Is there a specific mechanism?
Yes, it relies heavily on another key feature: the dual code, or duality of patterning. This is a really clever trick of language design.
Okay, dual code.
2 levels, exactly. Level 1 consists of a small, finite set of meaningless units. In spoken language, these are sounds, phonemes. Think of the sounds K, A, T. By themselves, they don't mean anything.
Okay, meaningless sounds, level 2.
At level 2, we combine these meaningless sounds in specific ways to create a vast number of meaningful units, words, parts of words, morphemes. So K, A, T combine to make the meaningful word cat, but rearrange them to A, A, T, and you get act. Same sounds, different order, different meaning.
Ah, so a small inventory of meaningless bits build a huge inventory of meaningful bits.
Precisely. It's incredibly efficient. If every single concept required its own unique, indivisible sound, our brains couldn't possibly store it all. Duality of patterning lets us recycle a small set of sounds, maybe 30 to 50 in most languages, to create hundreds of thousands of words.
That makes sense. This dual code, was it considered the thing that separates us?
For a long time, yes, it was seen as a uniquely human hallmark. But, like many things in science, it's gotten a little more complicated recently.
How so? What complicated it?
Well, some recent studies on birds have thrown a small wrench in the works. Specifically, research on the chestnut-crowned babbler in Australia and pied babblers in Africa.
Right, I remember reading something about that. What did they find?
The chestnut-crowned babbler, for instance, uses 2 basic sounds, let's call them A and B. Researchers found that when they combine them as A-B, it functions as one type of call, maybe related to flight. But when they combine them as BAB, it functions as a different call, related to feeding chicks.
Huh, so they're rearranging the same basic sounds to make different meanings.
Functionally distinct calls, yes. It suggests a rudimentary form of patterning, using meaningless elements to create different meaningful combinations.
Is it the same as human language? Does it have grammar?
That's the crucial difference. No. While it shows reuse of elements, which is interesting, these bird calls lack complex grammar. They don't have syntax, they can't embed ideas within ideas, they can't create infinitely varied sentences about anything and everything. The complexity isn't there.
So it hints at maybe an early stage, but it's not the full system.
Exactly. The degree of complexity in human language, enabled by grammar, is still leagues beyond. Which brings us to another key feature: displacement.
Displacement.
Yeah.
Talking about things that aren't right here, right now.
Precisely. We can talk about last summer's vacation, plans for next week, the Big Bang, hypothetical situations, unicorns, things remote in time, space, or even reality. Our conversation isn't tied to the immediate environment.
Animals can't do that. Or not really.
There are limited examples. The classic one is the honeybee's waggle dance. A bee finds nectar, flies back to the hive, and performs a dance that tells other bees the direction and distance to the food source.
That's definitely displacement. The nectar isn't in the hive.
It is. But compare the scope. The bee can only communicate about the location of nectar recently found. It can't discuss yesterday's nectar or speculate about potential nectar sources over the next hill or complain about the quality of the pollen.
Right. The degree of displacement in human language is astronomical by comparison. Past, future, abstract concepts, fiction.
It frees us from the immediate present in a way no other communication system seems to.
Okay, and finally, the big one you mentioned, grammar and complex meanings.
Yes. Human language uses sophisticated grammar, things like nouns and verbs, tense and aspect markers, ways to subordinate clauses to express incredibly complex ideas and relationships. And the engine driving a lot of this complexity is recursivity.
Recursivity, that sounds complicated. What is it?
It's the ability of a linguistic rule to be applied to its own output. Or, put simply, it's the ability to embed a structure inside another structure of the same type, like Russian nesting dolls.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Think about noun phrases. You can have the dog. That's a noun phrase. But you can embed another noun phrase inside it using a possessive, the neighbor's dog. Now, the neighbor is a noun phrase inside the bigger one.
Okay.
And you can keep going. My friend's neighbor's dog. Or using relative clauses. The dog that chased the cat that climbed the tree. You can embed clauses within clauses. Theoretically, there's no limit to how deep you can go.
And why is this recursive ability so important? What does it let us do cognitively?
It allows us to build and understand hierarchical structures and complex relationships between ideas. Without recursion, you'd likely be stuck with simple linear sequences of thought. The man saw the dog was brown, the dog barked.
Right, just flat statements.
Recursion lets you combine those into, the man saw the brown dog that barked. It allows for nested thoughts, dependencies, qualifications, mirroring the complexity of the world we perceive and think about. Many linguists, like Chomsky, argue that recursion might be the fundamental computational mechanism that makes human language, and perhaps human thought, unique.
That makes a lot of sense. Recursion is the engine of complexity. Okay, so we have these unique design features. Now let's get into the actual structure, the nuts and bolts. How is language built from the ground up? And where does the brain fit in?
Right. Let's connect the abstract system to the physical brain neurolinguistics. Our understanding really kicked off in the 19th century with the study of people who had suffered brain damage, leading to specific language problems called aphasias.
And this led to identifying key areas like Broca's and Wernicke's areas.
Exactly. Though it's important to remember, we now know language processing is much more distributed across the brain. But these areas are definitely critical hubs. Paul Broca, back in the 1860s, studied patients who could understand language but couldn't speak fluently. His most famous patient could only say tan.
Tan. Wow.
After Tan died, Broca examined his brain and found damage in a specific part of the left frontal lobe, now called Broca's area. Damage there typically causes expressive aphasia.
So expressive aphasia means difficulty producing language.
Yes. People with Broca's aphasia often know what they want to say, but they struggle immensely to get the words out. Their speech is slow, effortful, halting. It often lacks grammatical connecting words prepositions, articles sounding very telegraphic like walk dog instead of I will take the dog for a walk. But their comprehension is usually relatively intact.
Okay. And then Wernicke found something different.
About a decade later, Carl Wernicke described patients with damage in a different area, in the left temporal lobe, Wernicke's area. These patients had the opposite problem, receptive aphasia.
Meaning they could speak but not understand.
Exactly. Their speech is often fluent, grammatically well-formed, sounds natural in rhythm and intonation. But it does make sense. It can be filled with incorrect words, made-up words, neologisms, or jargon. And crucially, their comprehension of spoken or written language is severely impaired. They often seem unaware of their errors or that they aren't making sense.
So Broca's production impaired, comprehension, okay. Wernicke's production fluent but nonsensical, comprehension impaired, that's a stark difference.
It really is. And it suggested this fascinating division of labor in the brain. Maybe Broca's area handles grammar and production planning, while Wernicke's handles meaning and comprehension. We now know it's more complex, involving networks connecting these and other areas, like the crucial pathway called the arcuate fasciculus that links them.
And this processing, it's primarily on one side of the brain, right?
Yeah.
Lateralized.
Primarily in the left hemisphere. For most right-handed people, yes. The right hemisphere plays roles too, especially in things like understanding prosody, the emotional tone of voice, and appreciating context or humor. But the core grammar and word processing is heavily left lateralized.
And here's the key point connecting back to modality independence. This applies to sign language too, doesn't it?
Absolutely crucial point. Deaf signers who suffer strokes affecting Broca's area develop a signing equivalent of expressive aphasia. Their signing becomes slow, ungrammatical, effortful. Those with damage to Wernicke's area develop receptive signing aphasia. They sign fluently but nonsensically and can't comprehend signs well.
So it's not about the vocal cords or the ears, it's about the brain's core language processing machinery.
Precisely. The impairment is in processing linguistic structure, whether that structure is conveyed through sound or through visual gestural signs.
Okay, fascinating. Now let's zoom down to the most basic building blocks of the sound system, phonology.
Right. The fundamental unit here is the phone. A phone isn't just any sound. It's an abstract mental category representing the smallest sound unit that can distinguish meaning in a particular language.
How do we know if a sound difference is meaningful?
We use minimal pairs. Take the English words bat and pat. They differ only in the first sound.
Yeah.
B versus P. Because changing that one sound changes the word entirely. We know B and P are distinct phones in English.
Okay. But sometimes sounds vary without changing the meaning, right?
Exactly. Those variations are called allophones. Think about the T sound in English. In the word top, you pronounce it with a little puff of air. It's aspirated, T-A. But in stop, there's no puff of air. Step.
Right. I can feel the difference if I put my hand in front of my mouth.
But does that difference ever change one English word into another? No. So the aspirated T and unaspirated T are just allophones, different ways of pronouncing the single English phone T depending on the context.
Yeah.
Our brains filter out that difference as non-meaningful.
But this isn't universal, is it? That same puff of air might matter in another language.
Bingo. That's where it gets really interesting and shows how arbitrary language systems can be. In Mandarin Chinese, for instance, that very difference between an aspirated P and an unaspirated P is phonemic. It distinguishes meaning. Pia means crouch, while pa means ate.
Wow. So a subtle sound difference that English speakers barely notice and treat as the same is crucial for telling words apart in Mandarin.
Exactly. Each language slices up the continuous stream of possible human speech sounds differently, deciding which distinctions matter for meaning and which are just noise or variation.
Okay, so these phonemes, the vowels and consonants, are called segments. They combine to form syllables. But there's more to sound than just the segments, right?
Yes, we also have suprasegmental features. These operate above or across the individual segments, things like stress, pitch, and intonation.
How do they convey meaning?
In English, stress can distinguish nouns from verbs, like record noun versus record verb. Intonation changes the statement, he's coming, into a question, he's coming. But in many languages, especially in Asia and Africa, pitch itself is used phonemically. These are tone languages.
Like Mandarin.
Mandarin is a famous example, but also Thai, Vietnamese, Yoruba. In Thai, the syllable suea can mean tiger, mat, or shirt, depending entirely on whether you say it with a high tone, falling tone, rising tone, etc. The pitch contour is part of the word itself.
Incredible. And sign languages have something analogous to phonemes.
They do. Instead of sounds, sign languages are built from basic gestural elements, traditionally called cherems, now often just referred to as phonological parameters. These include hand shape, location where the sign is made relative to the body, movement, palm orientation, and non-manual features like facial expressions.
And changing just one of those elements changes the sign's meaning.
Yes, just like changing B to P changes bat to pat, change the hand shape or the movement of a sign, and you get a different word. It's the same principle of combining meaningless building blocks into meaningful units, just in a different modality.
Okay, from sounds or signs, we build words. That takes us to morphology.
Right. Morphology is the study of word structure, how words are built from smaller, meaningful pieces called morphemes. A morpheme is the smallest unit that carries meaning or grammatical function.
And these can be whole words or parts of words.
Exactly. We distinguish free morphemes, which can stand alone as words, like cat, run, happy, from bound morphemes, which can't stand alone and must be attached to other morphemes. These are usually affixes, prefixes, like in unhappy, or suffixes, like ing in running.
Okay, and we use these bound morphemes, these affixes, for different jobs, right? Inflection and derivation.
Two main jobs, yes. Inflection uses morphemes to add grammatical information to a word without changing its core meaning or its word class, like noun, verb, adjective. Adding s for plural. It's for past tense, walked, ing for progressive aspect, sinking, singing. The word remains a noun or a verb, just marked for number or tense. Inflection is usually very regular and applies broadly.
And derivation.
Derivation is different. It uses affixes to create new words, often changing the word class or significantly altering the meaning. Adding to the verb teach creates the noun teacher. Adding un to the adjective happy creates a new adjective unhappy with the opposite meaning. Derivation is often less regular and more idiosyncratic.
Got it. Inflection modifies, derivation creates. Now, the really cool part is how different languages rely on these processes to different degrees, right? This linguistic typology based on morphology.
Absolutely. This is where you see dramatically different strategies for building words and sentences. It gives you a real aha moment about linguistic diversity. We can sort of classify languages along a spectrum based on how they handle morphology.
Okay, let's walk through the main types. What's at one end?
At one extreme, you have isolating languages, also called analytic languages. Chinese, particularly Mandarin, is the classic example. Vietnamese is another.
What defines them?
Minimal morphology. Words tend to consist of single morphemes. Grammatical relationships like tense, number, or possession aren't marked by changing the word itself with affixes. Instead, they're indicated by word order, or by adding separate function words.
So to say two cats, you just say the word for two and the word for cat. The word cat doesn't change.
Pretty much, yeah. Or tense might be marked by adding a separate word meaning past. The words themselves remain isolated, unchanging units. All the grammatical work happens in the syntax.
Okay, what's the opposite of that?
Well, moving along the spectrum, you get fusional languages. Latin and Russian are good examples. Many Indo-European languages lean this way.
Fusional, meaning morphemes merged together.
Exactly. A single bound morpheme, a single suffix usually, often encodes multiple pieces of grammatical information simultaneously. It's very dense. The classic Latin example, bonus. Bon means good. The S ascending tells you three things at once. It's masculine, it's singular, and it's in the nominative case, subject form.
Wow, that's efficient. One sound, three jobs.
Highly efficient in terms of length, yes. But it often leads to complex and irregular patterns because the forms of the affixes can change depending on the stem or the specific combination of meanings. Think of irregular verbs in English or noun declensions in Latin.
Makes sense. Okay, what's another major type?
Then you have agglutinative languages. Turkish, Finnish, Hungarian, Japanese, Korean, Swahili. Lots of languages fall into this category. Here, words are built by stringing together multiple morphemes in a clear sequence, like beads on a string.
Each morpheme keeps its meanings separate.
Largely, yes. Each affix typically represents one distinct piece of grammatical information, like plural or past tense or from. The boundaries between morphemes are usually clear and the forms don't change much.
The Turkish example you mentioned, evlerinizden.
Perfect example. It breaks down transparently. Ev, house, plus willer, plural, plus iniz, your, plural you, plus den, from your houses. Each bit adds its meaning sequentially. Words can get quite long, but the structure is very regular.
Okay, that's a really different feel from fusional. And there's one more extreme type.
Yes, the far end of the complexity scale. Polysynthetic languages. These are found mainly in the Americas, like Yupik, Mohawk, and Siberia.
Polysynthetic, many combinations.
Extreme combinations. These languages rely so heavily on complex morphology that they can often express the meaning of an entire English sentence within a single, incredibly complex word. Nouns can get incorporated into verbs, multiple affixes pile up.
The Yupik example is mind-bending. Tuntusukutarnik satenkiktuk, meaning he had not yet said again that he was going to hunt reindeer. That's one word.
One word. It contains the verb root plus morphemes indicating tense, future, aspect, not yet. Repetition again, negation not, subject, and even the object reindeer incorporated into the verb complex.
What does that imply about how speakers think or process information? It seems like you're building the whole sentence structure inside the word.
That's a great way to put it. The complexity that English puts into syntax, word order, clauses, polysynthetic languages often pack into morphology. It suggests a very different way of assembling thoughts into language, perhaps more sequentially building up complex events within a single lexical unit. The cognitive load shifts from arranging words to generating the right internal structure of the word.
Fascinating. Okay, so from morphology, the structure of words, we zoom out to syntax, how we arrange these words into sentences.
Right. Syntax provides the rules for combining words into phrases and clauses to create meaningful utterances. And just like with morphology, languages have different strategies for encoding grammatical functions syntactically.
What's the main contrast here?
A big one is how languages indicate who did what to whom, the subject and the object. English relies heavily on word order. We are primarily a subject-verb-object, SVO language.
Meaning the order tells you the roles. The dog chased the cat is completely different from the cat chased the dog.
Exactly. Change the order, change the meaning fundamentally. The position defines the function.
But not all languages work that way.
Not at all. Many languages, like Latin, Russian, German, or Japanese, which is SOV, rely more on morphology, specifically case marking, to show grammatical roles.
Case marking, like those endings in Latin, nominative, accusative.
Precisely. In Latin, you can say, Dominus servos vituperabat. The master was cursing the slaves. Dominus ends in ovia, nominative, subject. Servos ends in ois, accusative, object. Because the endings clearly mark the roles, you could reorder the sentence quite freely. Servos dominus vituperabat, or vituperabat dominus servos, and it still means the master cursed the slaves. The word order is freed up for emphasis or style because the morphology does the grammatical heavy lifting.
So English uses syntax, order, where Latin uses morphology, case endings, to signal the same thing.
That's a key difference. And this leads linguists to look for syntactic universals, common patterns in sentence structure across languages. The most basic classification is based on the default order of subject, verb, and object.
SVO like English, SOV like Japanese, VSO like Welsh.
Right. And what's really interesting are the implicational universals. These are statistical tendencies where having one feature strongly predicts having another feature.
Like if you know the word order, you can predict other things about the grammar.
Often, yes. For example, languages that are predominantly SVO, like English or French, overwhelmingly tend to have prepositions, words like in, on, under, with it come before the noun phrase in the box.
Okay. What about SOV languages, the most common type globally?
SOV languages like Japanese, Turkish, Hindi, or the Australian Aboriginal language Kamilaroi mentioned in the sources usually have postpositions. These function like prepositions but come after the noun phrase, the equivalent of the box in.
Interesting. Same function, different position linked to the basic word order.
Exactly. And there are other correlations. SOV languages also tend to place adjectives before the nouns they modify, while SVO languages often place them after, though English is a bit mixed here. These systematic patterns suggest there are deeper cognitive or functional constraints on how human brains prefer to structure sentences. It's not just random variation. #tag origins, evolution, and cultural context.
We've covered the structure from brain to sentence. Now, let's tackle the really deep history. Where did this incredibly complex system come from? The origins.
The million-dollar question, and maybe the hardest, because spoken language leaves no fossils. As the sources stress, it's highly speculative. But broadly, the theories fall into two main camps: continuity versus discontinuity.
Okay, continuity-based theories. What's the idea there?
This is the view held by most scholars today. It suggests language evolved gradually, incrementally, out of earlier pre-linguistic systems in our hominin ancestors.
Evolved from what, though? What were the precursors?
Different theories propose different starting points. Maybe it evolved from primate communication systems, becoming gradually more complex. Perhaps it started with gestures, which later shifted to vocalizations. Some, like Darwin, or more recently Stephen Mithen, suggest connections to music or rhythmic vocalizations used for social bonding or cooperation.
So a slow buildup over a long time, driven by the need to cooperate, maybe.
That's generally the idea. As social groups got larger, as hunting and toolmaking became more complex, the selective pressure for better communication increased. We needed ways to share complex plans, teach skills, maintain social cohesion. Language emerged as the adaptive solution, with cognitive abilities like theory of mind developing alongside it.
Okay, that sounds plausible. What's the alternative? The discontinuity-based theories.
This view, most famously associated with Noam Chomsky, argues that human language is so radically different, so much more complex than any animal communication, that it couldn't have just evolved gradually. It represents a qualitative leap.
A sudden jump, how would that happen?
Chomsky has speculated, somewhat controversially, about a relatively sudden event. Perhaps a single random mutation, maybe a slight rewiring of the brain, that instantly endowed humans with the core computational machinery for language, particularly recursion. He talks about the language organ emerging almost fully formed.
Like flipping a switch.
That's the metaphor sometimes used. It stresses the uniqueness and the gap between human language and everything else. It's less about a literal single mutation now, perhaps, and more about emphasizing that the crucial elements didn't just smoothly evolve from primate calls.
And there's that recent finding pushing the timeline back. March 2024.
Yes, some reports based on anatomical and archaeological evidence suggest that the necessary vocal tract changes, and perhaps the cognitive prerequisites for early forms of language, might have begun developing as far back as 1.6 million years ago with Homo erectus.
Wow, 1.6 million years. That definitely lends more weight to a very long, gradual, continuity-based evolution, doesn't it?
It certainly suggests a much deeper timescale for the beginnings of the journey towards modern language than previously thought.
Okay, so regardless of exactly how it originated deep in the past, how do humans today get language? The acquisition process.
It's remarkable. Darwin called it an instinctive tendency to acquire an art. And first language acquisition in children is astonishingly predictable and rapid across all cultures and languages.
There's a sequence, right? A pattern.
A very clear sequence. Even in the first month, babies can distinguish subtle differences between speech sounds from any language, sounds they might never hear or use themselves later. It's like they're born ready for any possibility.
Amazing. Then what?
Around 6 months, they start babbling. This isn't just random noise. They're practicing the specific phones, the sound inventory of the language they hear around them. Japanese babies babble with Japanese sounds, Swedish babies with Swedish sounds.
They're tuning in.
Exactly. First words typically emerge between 12 and 18 months. Then there's often a vocabulary spurt. And the really crucial stage is around 2 to 3 years old. Telegraphic speech.
Telegraphic. Like sending a telegram. Bare bones.
Kind of. They start putting 2 or 3 words together in meaningful, structured combinations, but often leaving out the little grammatical function words. So instead of, I want more juice, they might say, more juice, or daddy go car.
But the order is usually right, isn't it? It shows they grasped the underlying syntax?
Yes, that's the key. They understand the SVO or SOV structure of their language. They know which words go together. They're applying grammatical rules, even if incompletely. And by around age 3, sometimes a bit later, most children are speaking in fluent, complex, grammatically correct sentences.
And all this happens without formal lessons, without parents constantly correcting grammar.
Mostly, yes.
Yeah.
It just seems to unfold, which is the strongest evidence for that innate biological predisposition we talked about earlier.
Okay, what about learning a language later in life? Second language acquisition.
It's a different beast. While children exposed early can often achieve native-like fluency in multiple languages, it's much rarer for adults who start learning later, especially after puberty. There seems to be a critical period, or at least a sensitive period, for acquiring language with native-like proficiency, particularly pronunciation and complex grammar.
Why is it harder for adults?
Several reasons are proposed. Maybe the brain loses some plasticity, but also, crucially, your first language profoundly influences how you learn subsequent languages.
How so? It gets in the way.
It shapes your perception. You tend to hear the sounds of the new language through the filter of your native phonemes. You might try to apply the grammatical rules or word order of your first language. It creates interference and requires conscious effort to overcome those ingrained patterns.
Right. Okay, so language isn't just abstract rules, it's deeply embedded in how we interact. This brings us to the social life of language, pragmatics, and culture.
Exactly. Pragmatics is the study of how context influences meaning. The same sentence can mean very different things depending on who says it, to whom, when, where, and why.
Like if someone asks, can you reach the salt? They're not usually questioning your physical ability.
Right. It's an indirect request. That's pragmatics. We understand the intended meaning beyond the literal words. It also involves things like deixis words, whose meaning depends entirely on the context of utterance, like I, you, here, now, yesterday. The reference point shifts constantly.
And we also do things with words, right? Speech acts?
Absolutely. Some utterances don't just describe the world, they change it. When a judge says, I sentence you to 5 years, or someone says, I promise, or I name this ship, the words themselves perform an action. Naming, promising, sentencing, apologizing. These are all speech acts.
Language as action. And beyond these functions, language is tied up with who we are, with identity.
Massively so. The way you speak, your accent, your dialect, your vocabulary choices, signals membership in particular groups. Regional, social, ethnic, professional. It's a key marker of identity. And we use language for social bonding, what anthropologists sometimes call social grooming, maintaining relationships through conversation.
This is why linguists talk about language varieties, dialects, accents, styles.
Exactly. It's not just correct versus incorrect language. It's a rich tapestry of different ways of speaking, each serving social functions and marking identity. We all command different register styles, how you talk to your boss versus your best friend versus a baby.
And some cultures take this link between language and social structure really far, encoding social position right into the grammar. Social dexes.
Yes, this is fascinating. English has a relatively simple system titles like Mr., Mrs., Doctor, Your Honor to show respect or formality. But many languages have much more elaborate grammatical systems for marking social relationships.
Where do we see really complex examples?
East and Southeast Asian languages are well known for this. Japanese, Korean, Javanese, Thai. They often have complex systems of honorifics and different vocabulary sets depending on the relative social status of the speaker, the listener, and even the person being talked about.
So you might have different words for eat or sleep or even you depending on whether you're talking up or down the social hierarchy.
Precisely. The grammar itself forces you to constantly acknowledge and perform social status relationships in everyday conversation. It's deeply embedded.
And the source material had that incredible example from Dirbal, an Australian Aboriginal language, about the mother-in-law.
Yes, the Dirbal mother-in-law language is a classic, almost unbelievable example of social DX. Due to strict social taboos, a man traditionally had to use a completely separate, special vocabulary, different nouns, different verbs, when speaking in the presence of his mother-in-law.
A whole different set of words just for that specific social context.
Yes, it wasn't just being polite. It was a completely different lexicon used to navigate that taboo relationship. It dramatically shows how language isn't just for transmitting information about the world. It's a tool intricately woven into the social fabric, maintaining kinship structures, taboos, and social order. #6. Language diversity, change, and endangerment.
Wow. From sentence structure to avoiding your mother-in-law via vocabulary. Okay, let's broaden out again. We've seen the internal complexity. Now let's look at the sheer diversity of languages, how they change, and unfortunately, how fragile they are. Starting with that fuzzy line between a language and a dialect.
Ah, yes, the classic problem. Linguistically, the distinction is often meaningless. Dialects are just mutually intelligible varieties of a language. But politically and socially, it's a whole different story.
Hence the famous saying,
Attributed to Max Weinreich, a language is a dialect with an army and navy. It highlights that the label language often comes down to political power, national identity, and recognition, not purely linguistic difference.
The sources mention Chinese varieties as an example.
All right, Mandarin, Cantonese, Hakka, Wu, these are often called dialects of Chinese, partly because they share a common writing system. But spoken, they can be as different from each other as, say, French is from Spanish or Italian. Yet French, Spanish, and Italian are universally called separate languages.
So mutual intelligibility isn't the deciding factor in practice.
Often not. Conversely, look at Serbo-Croatian. Before Yugoslavia broke apart, it was generally considered one language with regional variants. Now, Serbian, Croatian, Bosnian, and Montenegrin are often promoted as distinct languages, emphasizing minor differences and sometimes even adopting different scripts, Cyrillic versus Latin, to solidify separate national identities, even though they remain largely mutually intelligible.
Politics shaping linguistics. Okay, setting aside the definition issues, how many languages are there, roughly? Global diversity.
Estimates vary, but the general consensus is somewhere between 6,000 and 7,000 living languages spoken today.
That sounds like a lot.
It is an incredible diversity of human thought expressed structurally, but the distribution is incredibly skewed.
How so?
Get this. About 94% of the world's population speaks only 6% of the world's languages. Just 389 languages have over 1 million speakers each, and these tend to be the languages of wider communication, government, media, the internet.
So a few mega languages dominate and thousands of smaller languages are spoken by relatively few people.
Exactly. The big language families reflect this. Indo-European languages, like English, Spanish, Hindi, Russian, are spoken by almost half the world's population, around 46%. Sino-Tibetan, including Chinese languages, by about 20%. Niger-Congo, covering much of sub-Saharan Africa, around 7%. Afro-Asiatic, including Arabic and Hebrew, next. A few families account for the vast majority of speakers.
But there are also languages that don't seem to belong to any family. Language isolates.
Yes, and these are fascinating mysteries. Isolates are languages that have no known genetic relationship to any other language, living or dead. They're unique branches on the linguistic tree. Basque, spoken in Spain and France, is the most famous European example. It's completely unrelated to its Indo-European neighbors. Others include Zuni in New Mexico, Ainu in Japan, though sadly now highly endangered, Burushaski in Pakistan. They're linguistic puzzles, possibly remnants of much older language families that have otherwise disappeared.
Amazing windows into potentially different ways of structuring thought, but language isn't static, is it? It's always changing. Language change is natural.
Absolutely. Perpetual change is inherent to language. It happens at every level. Sounds change, phonology, word structures change, morphology, sentence patterns change, syntax, vocabulary changes. It's a constant, gradual process.
Can we see these changes happening? Are there patterns?
Yes, linguists have documented many systematic patterns of change. Sound change, for instance, can be remarkably regular. Grimm's law is a classic example.
What did Grimm's law describe?
It described a series of consonant shifts that happen early in the history of the Germanic language family, which includes English, German, Dutch, Swedish. It explains why words that are related across families often start with different sounds.
Like pater in Latin and father in English?
Exactly. The original Proto-Indo-European sound P systematically changed to F in the Germanic branch. Similarly, T changed to leth, like Latin tre versus English 3, and K changed to H, Latin centum versus English 100, originally with an H sound. It wasn't random, it affected the whole system.
Wow, systematic sound shifts. What about other kinds of change? Word erosion?
Yeah, erosion is common. Words get worn down over time through frequent, fast speech. The source mentioned mia domina, my lady in Latin, gradually smoothing and shortening over centuries to become madame in French, and eventually just the single-syllable ma'am in American English.
And grammaticalization, that sounds complex.
It's the process where a word with a concrete meaning gradually loses that meaning and becomes purely a grammatical marker. The English example, going to, was perfect. It used to imply actual physical movement. I am going to the store.
Right.
But now when you say, I'm going to eat lunch or it's going to rain, the gonna part has lost all sense of movement. It's just become a grammatical marker indicating future tense or intention. It's petrified into a function word. This happens all the time in language evolution.
Change is normal then. But this leads us to a much more urgent topic, language endangerment.
Yes, this is the flip side of diversity, the current crisis of language loss. While change is natural, the current rate of language death is unprecedented and alarming.
What are the numbers? How bad is it?
The consensus among linguists and organizations like UNESCO is stark. Based on current trends, globalization, the economic pressure to speak dominant languages, disruption of communities, it's estimated that somewhere between 50% and possibly up to 90% of the world's currently spoken languages will disappear or become moribund by the end of this century, by 2100.
Half to nearly all languages gone within 80 years. That's catastrophic.
It truly is. Think about the loss of cultural knowledge, history, unique worldviews embedded in those languages. UNESCO has levels of endangerment from vulnerable, where kids might not learn it at home anymore, through definitely endangered, severely endangered, to critically endangered, only spoken by a few elderly people, and finally extinct.
Once the last speaker dies, that entire linguistic system, that unique way of organizing reality, is gone forever.
Gone forever, unless it was extremely well documented, which most endangered languages are not.
Is anything being done? Can languages be saved? Revitalization?
Yes, thankfully. There are growing efforts worldwide by communities and linguists to document, maintain, and revitalize endangered languages. It's incredibly challenging work.
Are there success stories?
There are some. The source mentions Welsh, which went from serious decline to stabilization and even some growth, thanks to concerted efforts in education, media, and government policy in Wales. The Welsh model has actually inspired other revitalization programs, like the efforts for Maori in New Zealand. It shows that decline isn't inevitable if the community is committed and has resources.
That's hopeful. Now, one last point in this section, challenging that old idea, maybe from the Tower of Babel myth, that having lots of different languages inherently causes conflict.
Right. It's a persistent belief, but the evidence just doesn't bear it out. If linguistic diversity itself were a major driver of war or violence, you'd expect the most diverse places to be the most conflict-ridden.
But that's not what we see.
Often, no. The sources point out that many major conflicts, like the American Civil War, the wars in former Yugoslavia, the Rwandan genocide, these happen in places with a relatively low linguistic diversity. The opposing sides often spoke the same language or very closely related varieties.
So the conflicts were driven by politics, ethnicity, economics, religion, not the languages themselves.
Exactly. Language can certainly be used as a symbol or a rallying point in conflicts, but the diversity itself doesn't seem to be the root cause. Blaming linguistic diversity for conflict is often a simplistic misunderstanding of much deeper social and political issues. #Tech7 outro and provocative thought.
So we've journeyed from the building blocks of sound and grammar, through the brain, across millennia of evolution, and into the social and cultural heart of language, ending with this sobering reality of endangerment. Where does that leave us?
Well, I think the core takeaway is just how multifaceted language is. It's this incredibly complex system, structured, rule-governed, almost mathematical in some ways.
Right, the formal system, the mental faculty.
But at the same time, it's deeply embedded in our biology, constantly adapting, inherently social, and incredibly diverse. It's both innate and learned, rigid and fluid, universal in capacity, but specific in its thousands of manifestations. And modality independent of the structure transcends the medium.
It's the tool we use to build our thoughts, our relationships, our cultures.
And that leads us to the final provocative thought for you, the listener, to mull over.
Okay, let's hear it.
We've established that language and culture are inextricably linked. Language isn't just a code for expressing pre-existing thoughts. It shapes thought. It encodes cultural knowledge, worldviews, ways of relating to each other and the environment. And we've just discussed the stark reality that 50% to 90% of the world's languages might vanish by 2100. So the question is, what do we as humanity actually lose when we lose the vast majority of our distinct linguistic frameworks?
It's not just losing words, is it? It's losing the structures those words fit into, the unique ways of seeing the world those grammars enable.
Exactly. What perspectives disappear? What ways of categorizing reality, of understanding time, space, kinship, causality vanish when a polysynthetic language, or a language with intricate evidential markers, or one with unique spatial metaphors, goes silent?
What is the cost to human knowledge, to our collective understanding of what it means to be human, when that grammatical and semantic diversity collapses? Beyond the loss for the specific communities, what does it cost all of us?
It's a profound question about the ecology of human thought itself. What happens when the intellectual gene pool shrinks so dramatically?
Definitely something to think about. A loss of diversity in the deepest sense. Thank you for taking us through that incredible journey today.
My pleasure. It's a topic you can never stop exploring.
And thank you for joining us on the deep dive. We'll catch you next.